Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. I am your host, Dr. Harbir Sayan. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here, guys, as always, to learn and to grow. I always am so grateful for all the support, the liking, the sharing, the commenting. When you text me, message me, DM me, whatever you do, I really appreciate it. My favorite things are when people DM me and just, even if you disagree with what I just talked about on the podcast, I really, really appreciate that, because what I want from these conversations is thoughtful conversations, thoughtful debates, just something that's going to help us just all be better and to continue to grow as a profession. And, this episode is a follow-up to our previous episode with Dr. Peter Prpic. So if you didn't listen to the first one, I highly encourage you go back. In that first episode, last week's episode, Pete and I kind of laid the foundations of how he built his specialty contact lens business, and how a lot of the lessons that Peter's learned in his journey are really, they translate into any other practice and any other specialty. So I highly encourage that you go back and listen to that. As a reintroduction, if you haven't listened to that first episode, my guest is Dr. Peter Prpic, who graduated from NECO, Go NECO in 2013. He's a recipient of the NECO Presidential Medal. He's a fellow of the Scleral Lens Education Society. He is a co-owner of Prpic Eye Care Center, which is where we are, this beautiful practice in North Burnaby, BC, with his brother, Ivan Prpic. And again, I'm going to give a shout out to Ivan. Recently, new dad. Hey, congratulations, Ivan, on having your baby boy. Back to Pete. Peter is a board member with the BC Doctors of Optometry. He's a chair of the CE committee, so he's highly involved with all the education that goes on here in BC. And of course, recently crowned Young OD of the Year in 2019. He is an expert in this field of scleral lenses, specialty contact lenses, and that's what we're really going to dive into today. In the last conversation, it was a bit more general. What types of lenses does Peter fit in his office, and the types of things that patients he's helping? And one of the topics we touched on in that episode was higher order aberrations, and how that is one of the confounding factors when we're fitting sclerals. And in this episode, we're going to dive deep into HOAs, Aberrometry, how we can really help our patients take our scleral lens, specialty contact lens fitting to a whole different level. So Peter, welcome back to the episode, back to the podcast. Thank you for being here again, man. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's great to be here.
So as I just teed up there, we're going to be talking about some of these more special kind of detailed things about scleral lenses. Before we get into that, I want to go back to something we touched on in that first episode, which is some of the challenges that you have when you start to lean into any specialty, right? For me, the first specialty I really dove into was dry eyes 6-7 years back. And I found once you start becoming a bit of an expert even, a lot of these more complex cases start to come out of the woodwork pretty quickly, and some of them are hard to fix, hard to treat. But as you get better at it, you start to learn, you start to adopt some new technology. So I want to get into that. What were some of the snags, the challenges that you were hitting, the complex patients you were getting in this field of specialty contact lenses?
Yeah, so as my practice grew and I was fitting more and more patients, you'd have those slam dunk patients, the ones that just sort of, you think are a breeze, and it's like, yeah, this is why I do what I do. 100%. This is why I love doing this. And then you get to those ones you think like, man, you're scratching your head, you're wondering, you're hitting your head against the wall, wondering like, what's going on? Like, why isn't this working? Why can't I solve this patient's problem? And there was sort of a disconnect sort of between, sort of why some patients would be so successful in these modalities. And you think I have the same condition and, this next patient walking through my door, why isn't this solving their problems? And some of that was sort of, as you see enough patients again, and as you get more and more disease eyes, sometimes it was just the capabilities of the lens design. When you think about there's certain ocular conditions, or there's certain sort of shape of their eyes that makes this fit a challenge. So being able to offer things that help sort of fit the eye a little bit better have been fantastic, and have essentially opened up the door and opened up the opportunity to sort of essentially cater to more patients and really provide care to some patients that really need it. And that's sort of from a fitting perspective. But then there's also that visual component. When you think, there's some patients that you put a lens on their eye and they're extremely happy. And then there's other patients that would really struggle with their vision. And you think this should be the candidate. This should be the perfect candidate for this lens to work. And you're wondering why. Why is that happening? And you sort of have enough patients coming through your doors. I was fitting enough lenses that sort of the patients that would come in either with those struggles, or the patients that would come in saying, yeah, I'm happy, but there's always this but, right? And yeah, okay, they're better, but are they 50% better? Like, what about that other 50%? And for some people, this residual kind of concern or this residual problem, sometimes it's 1 or 2%, right? Yeah, they notice it, but it's not impacting them. But there was enough patients that I was seeing that it was significant enough to sort of impact sort of their lives, where they're saying happy but, or this is better, but that's worse. And you sort of, I had enough of those patients that I started looking into, okay, well, what can I do for them? What else can I offer? What else can I design? What else can I sort of do to really, help with the other 50% of what they're struggling with?
What were you finding was kind of the common denominator with a lot of these patients that were happy but? I think we've all had in our practices that 20/20 patient, but not 20 happy patient, right? They're seeing well as far as we can tell on the chart, but then something's just not like lining up for them.
Yeah, and some of them are really obvious, where I had some patients that they would say, okay, my vision is better. I can see more clearly, but the glare is worse, right? Some of it was very apparent and very obvious. And some of it was sort of patients, so it was more subtle, where it's like, yeah, okay, I'm happy, but this environment is still a concern. I'm still noticing like glare with sort of nighttime driving. I'm still noticing halos around lights. I'm still noticing some of that like monocular diplopia and some of these things in certain environments. And some of that, again, depending on what they do for work, depending on the environments that they're putting their eyes in, for some people, that can be very significant.
The cause of that is these higher order aberrations, which we've been kind of touching on, right?
Yeah.
And so can we define what are higher order aberrations? And how would we go about looking for those?
So higher aberrations are essentially slight deviation. Like how I wrap my head around this is there's slight deviations in the optics of the light entering the eye. And a lot of these sort of deviations come from sort of corneal irregularities, sort of some sort of irregularity on the front surface of the eye. How I explain it to patients is, think about looking into a pond of water. If you have a pond of water with a nice, smooth, uniform surface, you can see deep into that water, right? The optics of light get refracted very cleanly through that surface. Now, imagine you throw a rock into that water. You have all those waves and all those ripples. Well, you can't see as clearly. You can't see as cryptically because the optics of light get sort of refracted in these sort of very weird ways. That's how I explain it to my patients, where there's these residual irregularities to either the front surface of your cornea, the back surface of your cornea, something, sort of through the optical pathway as the light is hitting your retina, that's causing this irregularity, and it's leading to these sort of halos, leading to these sort of this glare with nighttime driving, leading to this monocular diplopia. And that's essentially what's causing it. And there was always a challenge to sort of connect to my patients in these ways, because I had no way to quantify this. I had no way to explain this and show them what's going on. It was just, they come in and I'd say, okay, but not know how much of it is going on. How is this person going to be impacted by this residual kind of aberration or not? Yeah. And that's sort of how I approach it, how I think about what these aberrations are.
I like that analogy of the pond. Actually, that's a very easy to understand analogy, and I think very relevant, right? You can see very clearly when the water is very still, versus even if there's a little wind that comes by and creates some minor little ripples, all of a sudden that's, that causes a lot of issues. And in some cases there's larger ripples and different levels of aberrations that our patients may be experiencing. So how do we go about measuring in general, or like in the past, how would we have gone about measuring this higher order aberrations? Or I guess the type of technology we'd use is Aberrometry, is the science behind that. So what does that look like?
Yeah, and actually, I may even take a step back from that. Is I heard this tip once from another sort of specialty lens provider, where they said sort of you can almost do like a point spread function test in your exam room with your chart.
Good old point spread function.
Yeah,
when's the last time you heard point spread function? Okay,
like most acuity charts have sort of, you can put a white circle on a black background. And what you do is you get the patient to sort of view that, whether it's with their glasses, whether it's uncorrected, whether it's sort of with their traditional kind of contact lens, rigid lens, scleral lens, whatever it may be. Okay. And sort of you have them look at that circle and you ask them, does it look like a distinct white circle? Or do you notice that there's some stretching? Do you notice that there's some glare, some doubling? Do you see, sometimes you'll see multiple circles. And this sort of essentially is a way for you very quickly in your exam room to sort of get an idea of, is there any ongoing or residual higher order aberration? Because if there's none of that residual higher order aberration, they're going to see that distinct, sort of that circle as a distinct white circle. But if they say, yeah, there's a tail, right? That can be some coma. There can be some sort of, there's different types of higher order aberrations and Zernike polynomials and things that, like I said, I'm definitely not an expert in, but essentially different types of higher order aberrations are going to look different ways or appear different ways. And again, sometimes monocularly, they'll cover their eye and say, yeah, I see 3 circles. There's the main one. I see that ghosting, that shadowing. There's 2 more. Or I see, yeah, there's a circle, but there's a tail, or there's sort of a starburst. There's 3 little tails coming off it.
Yeah.
And that's honestly a quick and easy way to sort of do that in the exam room and get an idea of how much is this going on, right? And even sort of before you quantify it any further, get an idea, okay, with this sort of diagnostic scleral lens on their eye, how much are we improving what they're struggling with, right? And this sort of helps direct you to get an idea of, okay, are you going to hit that wall? Are you going to have that patient that's happy but, right? So that's a really quick and easy way to sort of determine where you're going to start with. Then comes in this idea of aberrometry, right? So there's devices that are out there, and this aberrometry and aberrations, like this is not a new thing. It's been around for quite some time. And so using an aberrometer can essentially quantify those aberrations. Now, some of the things that I'm really excited about with Ovitz can provide is that not only can we sort of quantify it, but they can sort of have visual simulations to show the patients, like, hey, is this what you see at night? Is this sort of what you're, and they'll say yes, right? And they'll be able to sort of, again, connect with what we're talking about a little bit better. There's a way for them to sort of see, yes, I'm not going crazy, truly, right? Because again, the optometrists are telling the patient, look how good you can see on the chart. I got you to 20/20. Then they leave and they're struggling, right? And so it's a way for us to not only quantify the amount of aberration that's there, sort of have that discussion and build that trust and connection with the patient about sort of us understanding what they're living with and what they're struggling with, but also provides us an opportunity to solve the problem too.
Yeah, that's actually really great. There's a lot to unpack there real quick though. I love the analog, quick and dirty in the exam room way to kind of check for higher order aberrations. It's a white dot on a black background, and most digital charts should have that. Yeah. Something you mentioned in the previous episode, which I don't know if you maybe quickly skipped on it this one, but like just aberrations in general, you just say you would refer to as just blur, right? So lower order aberrations is like you're -1 and you're uncorrected. And if I put glasses on, well, I'm taking care of the lower order aberrations, but the higher order aberrations are those little ripples.
Right, exactly. And I sort of came up with that explanation to really try to help patients understand, right? We're talking languages that they've never heard these words before. And I say, well, aberration is just another fancy word for blur. Right?
Got it.
The lower order aberrations are the things that we deal with day in and day out, prescribing glasses, contact lenses, right? That sort of are regular patients that, they leave seeing happy and don't come back with any complaints, truly. It's when you have these higher order aberrations are the things that, are reasons or for blur essentially that patients are struggling with that we can't correct with sort of traditional refractive modalities.
What's up, everybody? I just want to take a minute to thank our partner for this episode, Ovitz. Have you ever had that patient who sees 20/20 but still says something's not quite right? Or those keratoconus or post-refractive surgery patients who even with scleral lenses still struggle at night with driving, starburst, glare, halos, double vision? It's probably due to higher order aberrations or HOAs, subtle optical imperfections that conventional glasses and contacts are not able to address. The Ovitz xwave Aberrometer is the world's first aberrometer purpose-built for higher order aberration correction. It doesn't just measure these optical aberrations, it gives you a way to correct them. Unlike other aberrometers, the Ovitz Aberrometry system streamlines everything from measurement and patient education to ordering HOA correcting lenses, all with a single click. That's why many leading eye care practitioners are quickly adopting the xwave Aberrometer into their practices, and why patients around the world are traveling to Ovitz authorized providers for life-changing results. Learn more at ovitz.us. That's ovitz.us, or if you're American, ovitz.us, and find out how you can help your patients with this technology. Now, back to our episode with Dr. Prpic. And let's talk a little bit more about the science behind the technology. You have it in your office, of course, here at Prpic Eye Care, since Peter's has dove deep into specialty contacts and does the molds of the eyes and all that kind of stuff. The X-Wave from Ovitz is another one of the pieces of tech that you've brought in. So tell us about when you brought it in and what it's been like to implement it.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So as I said, I had enough of these patients building up in my practice, the ones that are the happy but, the ones that you just want to do more for, truly, right? And you sort of sell them on this idea of a scleral lens and you promise them, oh, you're going to love this. It's going to sort of solve all the things that you're coming in with. And all of a sudden you hit that wall, again, where it's better but, right? Or I think of like a really sort of specific case where a patient was amblyopic on one eye, had keratoconus in both eyes, but, on his sort of non-amblyopic eye, struggling obviously with his vision as the keratoconus had progressed. And so coming in, fitting him with the scleral, I'm thinking, this patient's going to love it. This is going to be a slam dunk. Well, his exact words were, I can see clear on the chart, but the glare is worse. And I thought, no way, right? And I thought, this just doesn't make sense. Like, why is this patient struggling? Well, having the aberrometer here, we were able to measure and quantify his aberrations sort of with and without the lens. And it was true. And if you think about the aberration, because it comes from so many sources, right? And what the patient sort of notices is sort of the total aberration of their eye as an optical system, all right? And there's some cases where you slap a scleral lens on the eye. Now, the scleral lens only improves the front surface of the eye. What if there's a lot of residual aberration from the posterior corneal surface? Well, now we're amplifying that, and the patient's noticing that more, even though we're correcting other things. And so this patient really, like I said, was one of those like very obvious cases where traditional, like just regular scleral lens wasn't providing him the relief that we were hoping for. But being able to, again, one, quantify it as opposed to think, yeah, the patient doesn't know what he's talking about, or thinking, oh, it's something with the over refraction, being able to sort of discern what was going on just right off the bat just makes life way easier, really.
Yeah.
But be able to bring the xwave aberrometer in from Ovitz and really just sort of, again, quantify the amount of aberration, show the patients sort of what they're struggling, what's going on, has been instrumental with sort of connecting with patients, being able to sort of, again, really build that trust with sort of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and not being a source of sort of, well, you told me but, right? And me not having any explanation or reason for why. Now, not only can I quantify it and say, yep, you're right. Your aberration is definitely worse. This is why you're noticing more of that glare. But hey, I have now something that I can offer you to correct that residual higher aberration as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a really great example of a perfect case where it was valuable to you. And I think that that's actually something that's really interesting to think about. Again, you think, well, I'm about to just help this patient. It's going to be amazing. But you don't initially maybe don't think about the fact that you're actually amplifying an existing issue. And when their vision's blurry, they're not noticing it as much as when you try to make their vision more clear. In the last episode, again, if you haven't listened to it, please go back and check it out. But we talked about creating this algorithm for how you adopt a specialty and integrate it into your practice and the patient journey and the staff training, all that. So when you bring in an advanced piece of tech like this, you have to make sure it integrates into all of that. So how did you go about addressing all of that with this new piece?
I don't have any experience with any other aberrometers. Aberrometry really isn't part of what you think of most optometry offices in primary care. And even really what it comes down to is, even if you had an aberrometer and you were able to quantify and measure, hey, this is what's going on, there was not much you can do about it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, yeah, okay, I show the patient, yeah, this is why your vision isn't as good as you'd like it. This is why you're struggling. Okay, doc, well, what can I do about it? Not much, right? And so the idea of aberrometry, like I said, for primary optometric care generally hasn't been a thing, right? But there's been a lot of aberrometers that are out there. There's a lot of devices that can quantify it. But what Ovitz has really done and what they've sort of been able to figure out is essentially make it seamless for me to now have this patient do this scan and sort of integrate that data with ordering a lens and make it very easy where their team and their consultants essentially can design that HOA correction and talk to the labs directly so that we can order a lens. And so it's very quite seamless and quite simple for us to implement into our practice. Step one with sort of proceeding in this way is always fitting a lens well, all right? This aberration correction won't work if the lens is not fit well. If that lens is moving, if that lens is rotating, and that's the thing, really, a scleral lens is the perfect vehicle for us to offer this aberration control. My understanding is that this has been tried in spectacles. This has been tried in other types of sort of optical corrections, but the problem is those sort of corrections are not as stable on the eye. They're not able to sort of keep that aberration where it needs to be or keep that correction where it needs to be. Because if your pupil's moving relative to that device, or if that lens is rotating or shifting on your eye, well, it's not going to work. It's not going to make things any better. Now, a well-fit scleral lens that is sort of, again, locked onto the eye, not too tight, but just locked into place, I should say, is a perfect vehicle for us to now provide this higher aberration, provide these optics to essentially do that. Now, how does it do that? I'll sort of maybe backtrack a little bit here. I should have said this right off the bat, but I like to explain to my patients is the same principle as noise-canceling headphones. Okay. So, sound travels in waves, right? If we know what the sound wave is and we can sort of offer the inverse of that sound wave and overlay it, that's how we can sort of use noise canceling headphones. Well, the same thing can occur with the optics of light. If we know how that light is sort of entering our eye and sort of through that pupil, and we can almost apply the inverse of that aberration, we can sort of neutralize these higher aberrations. And that's how it works. But in order for us to do that, we need to measure it through a large pupil and make sure that if we're going to put this on a scleral lens, that lens is lined up how we want it to be lined up.
And so you have to fit them in just a regular scleral contact lens first.
So you have to fit them in the lens that is going to sort of, be able to apply these higher aberration,
I got you.
So it has to be a lab that offers this sort of aberration control.
First you fit them in the lens, and then you do the aberrometry on top of the lens.
Exactly. Gotcha. So what you do as a process is you fit a lens, and it has to be fitting well. All right. Then what you do is you order a lens with some markings, and those markings sort of essentially tell the device where to put the aberration relative to lens.
I got you.
If that lens, if they can't just put in the center of lens, because what if that lens is sitting a millimeter down, right? It's still stable, but it's not lined up perfectly with their pupil, for example, their optical center. So if that lens is rotated 5 degrees, if that lens is sitting down a millimeter, well, we need to know that. So there's a bunch of markings that come on that lens. You put the lens on the eye, you give it time to settle, then you repeat the scan of the higher aberration scan with the xwave aberrometer over top of that marked lens. Then it gives you it gives you an idea and gives Ovitz an idea in the lab where to apply or where to put that sort of HOA patch, they call it, onto that lens. And so it's seamless, like I said, in the sense that we fit the lens, order in essentially a comparable lens, the exact same lens with these markings on, do the scan, and then order again the next lens through Ovitz to sort of get that HOA correction.
So the first part of your process is the same as pretty much any scleral lens fitting that you're doing, except you have to get this specific from the specific lab. And then how about running the actual test? Is the staff doing that? And is it pretty easy for them to navigate the device?
Yeah, so it's something that staff are easily trained to do if need be. It's like most sort of devices we have nowadays. It's sort of line up the dot, get the patient to look a certain way, and it's sort of this, the machine does the scan on its own. Once you're lined up, once you're sort of in the right focus, it automatically takes those HOA measurements.
Oh, you showed me the device earlier. It looks a lot like just a small topographer or something like that. It doesn't take up a ton of space, and it doesn't look like I was expecting something a lot more of a contraption, but it's just very streamlined little device. That's nice. So your fitting process actually doesn't sound like it's all that different than when you're fitting your most scleral lenses. Staff training wasn't significantly different than like more whatever training they already have. So overall implementation's been pretty easy.
It's been great. Really, it's just about making sure the staff understands what we're doing and what's going on. And the device, and being able to sort of offer the device, and honestly being able to be on their website as find a provider through Ovitz website has been fantastic, because I've had patients seek me out. Patients are reading about these things and are aware of sort of things that can improve their struggles, right? They're whether they're on forums on Facebook chats or whether they're on Reddit, right? There's threads that sort of go into this device and this sort of aberration control. And so there's been some patients that have been fit elsewhere, again, are happy generally, but still struggling with certain things. And so seeking us out to sort of, again, improve on things, make things just a little bit better and solve their problems.
That's actually such a good point. Like, especially with patients like this who have gone through a lot, they've been fit, they kind of feel like they've gotten to the end of the road. Now they're looking for a community, they're looking for more information. Those patients are usually doing a lot of research. Again, Facebook groups, Reddit forums, things like that. Tell me about how much of that you've experienced yourself, patients seeking you out who've had like somebody else basically tell them like, this is all we got.
Yeah, and there's definitely been patients that have found us and sought us out for this reason exactly. And whenever I see, and most of why I fit scleral lenses is for keratoconus, right? The disease is way more prevalent than we would have even thought. And it's now that we have fantastic devices to sort of screen patients and diagnose early, like we are realizing and understanding that it's way more prevalent than it used to be. And I always ask my patients, whenever I see a brand new patient with keratoconus, either as a consult or one of my patients, I say, where are you on your keratoconus journey, right? Because I truly understand these patients are on a journey, right? And there's some patients that would say, I don't know, I was diagnosed a month ago. I don't know what this means, how this is going to impact my life. Then I have those patients that say, I've tried every lens, everything out there, and I'm still struggling, and they've sort of been through it all kind of thing. And so I always like to ask that. And it's the ones that are sort of either not aware of what's going on and the opportunities for us to improve things, or the ones that have struggled with some of these lenses and some of these fits in the past. And some of them were my patients before, where we'd hit a wall and I had nothing else to offer them, right? And so we now have the opportunity to, again, quantify their struggles and improve on and offer, like I said, this HOA correction through Ovitz as a way to improve their vision. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I like that question actually to ask. You can, again, we're trying to draw parallels with other specialties and things like that, but that's a great question to ask a patient. Where are you along your journey for this particular whatever?
Whether it's dry it's anything else, right?
Yeah, that's a really good question to ask actually, because a lot of times, I've done that. I've made the mistake of not really understanding where the patient is. And I'll say, oh, cool, we're going to try this, this, and this. Oh, I did that. Like for 2 years, I did that. And it makes me look a little silly, right? And the patient, they don't trust that process quite as much. They're not as invested. But once you've learned that and you've kind of understood their backstory, you've asked them the questions, they're a lot more bought in and they trust you a lot more. That's a really good question to ask. Yeah, on that note about the prevalence of keratoconus, I swear we were taught it was a much, much lower prevalence than what I see and I don't even see that many keratoconus patients, right? I feel like I'm seeing them much more regularly than what we were taught. Also, I don't remember being taught that there's a lot of South Asians or East Indian population that has keratoconus, but I see a lot of them in our office. Obviously, we see more of that just demographic in general that says South Asian, but I know like probably 10 people personally who have keratoconus. That's a way higher number than I would have expected. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and same thing. I remember being taught in school like 1 in 2,000 patients have keratoconus and thinking like, okay, it's not that many. Even just like the idea of when keratoconus really sort of progressed and when it became a thing. I remember thinking, okay, it's later on in their life. I think it was sort of late teens and sort of closer to 20 and 1 in 2,000. I remember that like being in my head. And same thing. I used to then you start seeing more and more patients, especially with a lot of the specialty sort of lens I do. Remember thinking like there is a lot more keratoconus out there. And we now have newer data to support that it's much more prevalent than we thought. And if you actually look at the studies that sort of showcased or explained a lot of those numbers at 1 in 2,000, well, how they were diagnosing patients with keratoconus was actually like retinoscopy, was sort of, keratometry Myers. It was not tomographers as we now know it. And so we now have the ability to catch these patients at much more subtle levels of keratoconus. So there are so many keratoconus patients that are out there that are struggling but have never been diagnosed. It's the ones that are mild forms of keratoconus that are sort of out there. Their vision's not perfect, but they're sort of, it's good enough. So they're not caught at the average optometry offices. They're not caught in the routine exam. They're not struggling enough to dive any deeper, but they just know my vision's not as good as my colleagues. It's not as good as my friends, as my spouse. And so some of the newer data is saying that it's closer to 1 in 500. Now, it's hard to compare the studies and a lot of them have regional differences. A lot of them have sort of nuance to sort of say, what's the real number? We don't know what the real number in regards to that prevalence is. And we might not ever know what the exact number is going to be. It's out there though. And I've sort of spoken to my colleagues, here about keratoconus and I truly believe that we need to do a better job as primary ODs to sort of catch it, to diagnose it. And it's something because it's there, it's in our chairs.
Totally. When's the last time you used the old school keratometer and check the Myers?
Yeah.
No, I mean, thanks. I got a nice topographer. I don't need to do that. No, that makes sense, right? And that goes with a lot of other diseases and conditions like in the past. All of a sudden, it seems like the prevalence is skyrocketing, but we actually just figured out how to look for it and find it and, and diagnose it. And so that makes sense. So keratoconus does seem, and again, we just have a general like primary care practice. We do a fair bit of myopia management, dry eye. I'm only just getting into sclerals and specialty lenses, but I've been seeing these keratoconus patients come through on a very regular basis. So those numbers didn't quite add up. So again, that piece of information is important too. If there's a primary care OD listening to this or watching, thinking, well, scleral lenses or specialty maybe doesn't really apply to me all that much. I bet you there's more keratoconus patients coming through your office than you think. And if you look for it, like with any specialty, right? You want to decide if dry eye is right for your practice or myopia management is right for your practice. Look at how many patients you have in your chair. Don't worry about external marketing, right? How many people are already there? And if you got a good portion, like we kind of talked about in the last episode, if you're already seeing enough of those people, that specialty could probably do fairly well to start. And then you start doing that other external, you get the referrals and you do the other stuff. I know you're a numbers guy. We've talked about this a couple of times in this episode and the last one, right? You do like to look at the metrics. How would you say Ovitz has benefited your practice on that side of things?
Yeah, so it's something that is sort of been able to sort of benefit our practice in the sense of just from a pure like patient experience, patient care, right? Being able to offer them solutions to their problems, things that we wouldn't be able to offer, things that other providers just aren't offering. And so, being able to, as I mentioned, having those patients that are seeking us out, having our patients that are truly struggling and being able to provide them with a solution and being able to really live up to our promises. I'm always amazed at how well this is working in our practice, right? And especially at the beginning, you bring in your device, you sort of hear other people talk about, other experts talk about their experiences and you think, I hope I'm going to be able to mirror that. And it really has been. And it's something that patients have been sort of able to sort of, because we're able to provide on what we're expressing to them and being able to sort of show them that it's an improvement, people have happily been able to pay for, like I said, these premium products and these premium optics really in their lenses.
I think that's actually an interesting point you just touched on. Well, first of all, like giving that whole different level of service and care and providing something that they literally, well, maybe can't get anywhere else, but not for a long distance from here, right? You're providing a service that they haven't been able to receive before is going to elevate that experience and likely turn into more word of mouth referrals from those patients, which is going to benefit your practice. But then that premium product side of things, this is an interesting topic I've been trying to negotiate with myself, with some of our colleagues, and I've even had some conversations on a podcast. But like, I think we shy away as ODs in general, we shy away from sort of the offering premium, offering high end because we're worried about people's budgets and, not wanting to sell something that's expensive. But I feel like it really elevates your practice when you can offer that. And if you're able to build the trust with the patient where they believe you that it's actually better to go with that premium product. Have you felt that experience here as well?
Yeah, and I think I've heard other people say this isn't my idea, but think about like what would you want? What would you give your family member, right? Whether it's a lens, like if my parents are coming and need progressives, am I going to give them the sort of highest level progressive, and I give them the one that is maybe the most budget friendly? Yeah. I want them to have a good experience, right? And same thing if I had a family member with keratoconus and was struggling with residual aberration, would I just say, well, this basic lens is good enough, or would I offer them that sort of premium lens? Would I offer them those premium optics? And when you start talking to patients, you start explaining again, sort of the benefits. You start explaining like how this is going to impact their life. You're not just selling them a lens, you're selling them solutions to their problems, right? And I think about how much people will sort of spend in their lives with other things, and the quality of life improvements that this can sort of provide our patients is fantastic, really. And there's a lot of studies recently have been done regarding sort of quality life impacts with sort of diseases like keratoconus, these other corneal conditions, and being able to really have a significant impact. Yes, there's an investment in these lenses, there's an investment in these products, but the return on that investment for these patients' day-to-day life is fantastic, right? And it's been amazing to see the experience that these patients have had, be able to truly solve their problems, right? The patients that are avoiding aspects of, say, driving at night. I don't go out with my friends. I need to rely on my spouse, my partner, and, and avoiding some of those things in their life, being able to fix that. Or for example, having patients that are struggling with sort of extended screen time because of that ghosting, because of that shadowing. And again, this is their livelihood. This is sort of what they do and what they do to provide for their families. And if we can make that easier for them, it's again, a fantastic return on that investment.
That's such a valuable point. The quality of life, I think, is a bit intangible, right? I think that's why sometimes we don't grasp it as well as we should. We can see the 20/20 on the chart or whatever, but we sometimes forget that how much it can affect their quality of life. And people are, even again, going back to dry eye, right? You say, oh yeah, you got a little dry eye, but some people are like really, really struggling, and it's affecting their interactions with other people, their ability to work, their effectiveness. And if we're able to solve those problems for our patients, that's invaluable for us to be able to do that.
And I'll just follow up if you don't mind. Yeah. So, and even just regarding like the xwave Aberrometer and like being able to quantify that, I have patients that are wearing these lenses or walking around with less higher aberration than I have in my eyes, right? and be able to show them that, and be able to show them how effective this truly is, and how amazing it is. It's a lot of people say it's like HD, right? Or they say they haven't seen this clear in years, and some people say I haven't seen like this in all my life.
Yeah,
right. It's amazing what we're able to do and what we're able to offer them.
That's amazing. Trevor Miranda was on a little while ago and talking about a different technology in a different space. But one thing he said, which I think kind of is might rub some people the wrong way, but I think we need to sometimes just to kind of wake up our colleagues a little bit, and even myself, to think a little bit differently. But when you have a technology like this that can improve somebody's quality of life, that can change their life to some degree, it's a disservice. You're doing a disservice by not telling them about it, not offering it to them just because maybe we're concerned about the pocketbook or whatever. It at least is our obligation to say, listen, you have this and I have this, right? This could help you. That's the very least we have to be able to do. And take it a step further. In the last episode, we touched on the importance of OD to OD referrals. I know you have this machine, this device. And if I have a patient who's struggling and I know that you could help them, Peter, it's on me to make sure they know you exist and this technology exists, and that person can, if they choose to, they can pursue that, right? And I think that's really, really important. As medical professionals, our number one obligation is to our patient. And so we want to make sure we're offering that. going back to that, we're worried about, premium and maybe it's going to be too expensive, but at the very least, we got to offer it. So anything we missed, anything we didn't talk about related to Ovitz, higher order aberrations that you think we want to share with our colleagues?
Yeah, and I think just understanding what's out there, I think is important for us as eye care providers. We can't be experts in everything, right? I can't be an expert in, I can't devote as much as my time as I do to specialty lens. I can't devote that much time to binocular vision, to other aspects of sort of what we should offer as optometrists. But I should be aware of what others, as you alluded to, what other people are offering, what's out there.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that these technologies exist. We have these opportunities to sort of help our patients truly, right? Patients are out there, patients are struggling with this. And Ovitz has been paramount, to sort of be able to, again, take another step further into what we're offering our patients, provide another solution to the patients that are struggling, right? And again, as you mentioned, not every patient needs this,
right,
but they're there, they exist, right? They're the ones that, like I said, sometimes they're struggling, have hit that wall, not only just in their life, but with other providers not being able to offer another solution. And again, we're happy to sort of, do scans, figure this out for patients and help patients and providers out.
That's amazing, Peter. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, if they want to learn more about the Ovitz xwave Aberrometer, or if they want to refer a patient, how could they connect?
The easiest way is just through our office email, info@prpiceyecare.com. We accept referrals from a lot of different providers and, patients directly. That's the best way. And we're able to sort of get patients in, do the scans, and nothing's committal, right? I always tell my patients, we're going to explore some options. We're going to talk about those options. And in the end, provide you with other things to consider, and whether they choose to proceed or not, again, that's up to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Once again, just letting patients know what exists and make them aware of it. And if they choose to pursue, that's up to them ultimately. info@prpiceyecare.com. So make sure you get in touch with Pete if you have any questions about that. I want to say a big thank you to Ovitz for partnering with us on this episode, for bringing forward this technology, which I think is going to be really life-changing for a lot of people out there who are struggling with these higher order aberrations, for helping practices like Peter's to elevate, and our profession ultimately to succeed, and for us to look more like experts for our patients, to serve them better. So thank you to Ovitz, and thank you to everybody who's listening and watching the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. See you guys in the next episode.